The streets of Douala's Bonaberi district knew Mabella like they knew the rising sun. She was impossible to miss, a mountain of a woman whose body moved like waves in the ocean with every step. Her clothes screamed wealth, imported lace from France, golden jewelry that clinked with each movement, and head wraps so elaborate they seemed to defy gravity. Her lips were painted crimson red, a color so bold it announced her arrival before she even spoke. In Bonaberi, if you walked 3 blocks in any direction, someone was discussing Mabella. Her mansion stood like a palace among the modest homes, with gates so tall they seemed to touch the clouds and cars that sparkled like diamonds under the tropical sun. Every Saturday, music thundered from her compound as she hosted lavish parties that the entire neighborhood could hear. People wondered endlessly about the source of her wealth, but fear kept their questions silent. Mabella owned the most prestigious gold trading office in Douala. The showroom gleamed with polished surfaces, expensive furniture that looked like it belonged in a presidential palace, and French perfumes that filled every corner. Customers came from across Cameroon, believing that buying from Mabella brought special blessings. Her workers spoke of her with reverence, and no one dared question how a widow living alone had built such an empire. Her husband had died 2 decades ago, leaving her with 3 children who now lived in France. They rarely visited, a detail that occasionally sparked gossip among neighbors, but Mabella waved off such talk with her heavy hands. She claimed she preferred her independence, living like a queen who needed no king beside her throne. But beneath the glittering surface, darkness festered. Every Friday night, when Douala streets fell silent and even the usual city noise seemed to hold its breath, strange things happened at Mabella's compound. Neighbors heard sounds they couldn't explain, massive wings beating against the night air, drums that seemed to come from another world, wind that howled through metal despite the still evening. It's just another of Mabella's parties, people told themselves, desperate to believe the comfortable lie. She's just enjoying her life. None of them suspected that behind the expensive clothes, the heavy makeup, and the endless gold, Mabella carried a secret so dark it would make their blood run cold. None of them knew that every Friday, she renewed a covenant written in blood. 20 years earlier, Mabella was not the woman Bonaberi knew. She was thin, desperate, and drowning in poverty. Her husband's death had left her with nothing but debts and hungry mouths to feed. Her children were young, her clothes were rags, and most nights she went to bed with an empty stomach and tears on her cheeks. One afternoon, as Mabella sat crying in her small room, her closest friend Amina visited. Amina had always been mysterious, speaking in riddles and knowing things before they happened. She looked at Mabella's desperate face and leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "There's a woman in Komba village," Amina said carefully. "She's not just a healer. She has power that can transform destinies. But the price?" She paused. "The price is not for the weak-hearted." Mabella's desperation overcame her fear. When you've tasted the bitter poison of poverty, when you've watched your children cry from hunger, morality becomes a luxury you can no longer afford. She agreed to go. The journey to Komba took hours through winding roads and dense forest. The deeper they traveled, the heavier the air became, as if the very atmosphere knew what awaited them. When they finally arrived at a small hut covered in red cloth and strange symbols, Mabella's skin crawled with premonition. Inside, an ancient woman sat on the earthen floor, her eyes gleaming with knowledge that seemed older than time itself. She didn't greet them normally, instead, she stared at Mabella as if reading every thought, every secret, every desperate wish hiding in her soul. "You carry destiny," the witch finally spoke, her voice like grinding stones. "But it sleeps within you, locked behind fear and morality. To awaken it, you must accept what your spirit already knows. Wealth demands sacrifice. Power demands blood. Youth demands souls." The witch explained the covenant in detail that made Mabella's stomach turn. She would need to lure young men, bright, promising young men with futures ahead of them. She would blind them with money, food, comfort, and pleasure until they forgot their families, their dreams, their very identities. Once they were completely under her control, a spiritual ego would come to claim them, exchanging their life force for her wealth. "You will become rich beyond imagination," the witch promised. "You will stay young while others age. You will command respect and fear. But you must never stop feeding the ego. Once you begin, there is no turning back. On the floor between them sat a small calabash filled with red powder that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. The witch held it out, and Mabella saw her entire future in that moment, the choice between endless poverty or blood-soaked wealth. Her hand trembled as she reached forward. Her mind screamed warnings, but her desperate heart silenced them all. She dipped her finger into the powder and brought it to her tongue. Fire exploded through her body. She screamed as something ancient and terrible bonded itself to her spirit. The witch laughed, a sound that echoed with triumph and doom. "The ego has accepted you," she declared. "Your new life begins tonight." Mabella stumbled out of that hut transformed, not just in power but in soul. The woman who entered seeking help had died. In her place stood a servant of darkness, hungry for wealth and willing to pay its terrible price. Etien was only 24 when destiny led him to Mabella's trap. He was a handsome young entrepreneur with dreams bigger than the sky, known throughout Douala for his sharp mind and impeccable style. His girlfriend, Nadege, loved him deeply, and his family had already started planning for his future wedding. Life stretched before him like an open road filled with promise. He attended a business networking event in Bonabri, dressed in a simple but elegant suit that showed his ambition without arrogance. He had no idea that predators' eyes were already locked on him. Mabella spotted him from across the hall, and something in her spirit jumped, the signal from the dark covenant she'd made. He was perfect, young, strong, bright-eyed, exactly what the ego demanded. She moved toward him with practiced confidence, her massive frame commanding attention, her golden jewelry catching every light. "Young man, you have the face of success," she said, her voice honey-sweet but with an undertone that made Etienne's skin prickle. She introduced herself as a successful businesswoman who loved helping promising youth. Within minutes, she had him laughing, comfortable, and impressed by the casual way she displayed her wealth. When she asked for his phone number, Etien gave it without hesitation. After all, networking was how businesses grew. He didn't notice the brief flash of triumph in her eyes. The next week transformed his life. Mabella showered him with gifts that seemed too generous to refuse. A brand new motorcycle appeared at his door. Envelopes thick with CFA francs arrived regularly. She invited him to expensive restaurants where the meals cost more than his monthly rent, treating him like royalty and whispering that he deserved so much more than his current struggles. Slowly, insidiously, the charm began its work. Etien started cancelling plans with Nadege, claiming he was busy with new business opportunities. He stopped attending family gatherings. His friends noticed the change but attributed it to new success. Only Nadege sensed something wrong, something deeply, terribly wrong. She confronted him at Mabella's gate one afternoon, tears streaming down her face. "Etien, what's happening to you? You've become a stranger. Please, come back to me." He looked at her with eyes that seemed clouded, distant, as if seeing her through fog. "I don't need you anymore," he said flatly, words that cut deeper than any knife. "Leave me alone." Nadege's heart shattered, but Etien felt nothing. The spell had sunk its claws deep into his spirit. He was no longer his own man, he was Mabella's puppet, dancing to strings he couldn't even see. Then came the final Friday night. Etien sat in Mabella's luxurious living room, feeling strangely weak but unable to understand why. She handed him a drink, sweetly spiced, telling him it would give him energy. Within minutes of swallowing, his body betrayed him. He collapsed onto the sofa, conscious but paralyzed, his eyes open but his voice stolen. Outside, the night changed. Wind roared from nowhere. Trees bent at impossible angles. The temperature dropped so suddenly that neighbors wrapped themselves in blankets, wondering at the strange weather. Mabella knelt beside Etienne's frozen form, her lips moving in chants that belonged to no human language. The air in the room thickened, becoming almost solid. Then it appeared, the massive spiritual ego, its wings spanning the entire room, its eyes burning like coals pulled fresh from hell's furnace. The ego descended onto Etienne's chest. Without ceremony or mercy, it grasped him in its talons and rose through the roof as if passing through water. In seconds, they vanished into the night sky, leaving no trace, no evidence, nothing but empty air where a promising young man had been moments before. By morning, Mama Bella looked 10 years younger. Her skin glowed. Her eyes sparkled. Her bank account had swelled with inexplicable new wealth. She stepped out of her house that morning humming a cheerful tune, greeting neighbors who had no idea they were looking at a murderer. Etienne's mother would cry for months. Nadege would search every corner of Douala. The police would file reports that led nowhere. To the world, he had simply vanished. But Mama Bella knew the truth, and she wore it like another piece of expensive jewelry. Jean-Paul was a final-year university student at the University of Douala, brilliant and focused, with grades that promised a bright future. His parents, simple farmers from the countryside, had sacrificed everything to send him to school. They dreamed of the day he would graduate and lift their family from poverty. Everyone who knew Jean-Paul believed he would succeed. He only attended the party in Bonaberi because his friends dragged him there after weeks of studying. You need to relax, they insisted. Life isn't just about books. If only they had known that relaxation would cost him his life. Mama Bella's eyes found him the moment he walked through the door. Something about bright students attracted her more than others, perhaps their potential tasted sweeter to the ego, or perhaps she simply enjoyed destroying hope. She approached him with practiced elegance, her golden dress shimmering under the party lights. "I can see intelligence in your eyes," she purred, touching his shoulder in a way that made his skin crawl even as his mind grew foggy. "Let me help you achieve everything you deserve." The charm worked faster on Jean-Paul than it had on Etien. Within days, he stopped attending lectures. His phone calls home became rare, then stopped altogether. When his worried parents traveled to Douala to check on him, they found him living in Mama Bella's mansion, wearing expensive clothes they'd never seen before, speaking to them like strangers. "I'm building a better life," he told his crying mother at the gate. "Stop bothering me with your village mentality." His mother collapsed in tears, but Jean-Paul walked back into the compound without looking back. The spell had already consumed him completely. He no longer remembered his dreams, his goals, or the family that loved him. He existed only to please Mama Bella, his mind trapped in a cage of her making. Friday arrived too quickly. Jean-Paul never saw it coming. One moment he was drinking the sweet beverage Mama Bella offered, the next moment darkness swallowed him whole. His body became a prison from which his consciousness screamed silently. The ego came as it always did, massive, terrible, inevitable. It took Jean-Paul the same way it had taken Etien, lifting him into the night sky and leaving nothing behind but empty space and shattered futures. By morning, Mama Bella's wealth had grown again. New customers flooded her gold shop. Deals closed themselves. Money appeared in her accounts like magic, because it was magic, the darkest kind, paid for with innocent blood. Jean-Paul's parents searched for months. His friends reported him missing. The university held his place open, hoping he would return. But Mama Bella simply smiled and continued her life of luxury, another soul added to her collection, another step deeper into darkness from which she would never escape. Years passed like rivers flowing toward the ocean, and Mama Bella's reputation grew with each sacrifice. She became known throughout Douala as Madame Millions, a nickname that made her laugh with pride. Nobody understood the source of her endless wealth, but in Cameroon, people learned quickly not to ask too many questions about successful people. Her mansion underwent constant renovations, each one more extravagant than the last. She imported furniture from Europe, installed golden fixtures in every bathroom, and built a swimming pool that glittered like a jewel in her compound. Her fleet of cars expanded to include vehicles that most people only saw in magazines. She attended every important social event in Douala, always dressed to outshine everyone else, always making sure her presence dominated the room. Every Friday night, the ritual continued. The strange sounds from her compound became so regular that neighbors stopped mentioning them. When new residents asked about the weird noises, longtime neighbors would shrug and say, "Oh, that's just Mama Bella's business. She's involved in some spiritual things, but she's harmless." Harmless. The word was a cruel joke. If they had known the truth, that at least a dozen promising young men had disappeared into her mansion, never to be seen again, their blood would have run cold. Mama Bella perfected her hunting technique over the years. She learned to spot vulnerability, to read the hunger in young men's eyes, to offer exactly what each one craved most. Some wanted money, others wanted status, some simply wanted to escape poverty. She gave them all what they desired, wrapping her poison in beautiful packages. Her gold shop became a monument to her success. Important business people from Yaoundé and beyond came to purchase from her, believing that her jewelry carried special blessings. In a twisted way, they were right, her gold did carry power, but it was power stolen from destroyed lives. The spiritual ego grew stronger with each sacrifice. Its visits became more dramatic, its presence more overwhelming. Mabella no longer feared it, instead, she had learned to take pride in serving it. She believed herself untouchable, protected by dark forces that no human could challenge. But in the spiritual realm, a balance always exists. Every action carries consequences, every covenant has terms that cannot be broken, and every spell eventually finds its way home. Mabella should have sensed that something was different about Antoine. Unlike her previous victims, he carried a protection she couldn't see, couldn't smell, couldn't detect with her corrupted senses. He was 23, newly finished with his electrical apprenticeship, humble in his ways and careful in his choices. His mother, Celestine, was a powerful traditional healer who had spent years protecting her children from spiritual dangers. Antoine only attended the party in Bonaberi because his friend insisted, practically dragging him there. "You work too hard," his friend complained. "Come out and enjoy yourself for once." If only his friend had known he was pulling Antoine toward the most dangerous woman in Douala. Mabella saw him from across the room and felt the familiar pull, the signal that here was another perfect victim. She approached him with her usual confidence, her massive frame draped in expensive Kent cloth, her golden jewelry announcing her wealth before she even spoke. "Young man, you have the eyes of someone destined for greatness," she said, her voice dripping with false kindness. "Let me help you reach your full potential." She gave him a thick envelope of money right there, not waiting for him to ask. Most young men would have been blinded by such generosity, but Antoine felt something wrong in his spirit. It was like a warning bell ringing in his soul, distant but insistent. He accepted the money, refusing would have been rude and possibly dangerous, but he didn't spend it. Instead, he went straight to his mother. Celestine took one look at the money and her face changed. She held the bills up to candlelight, closed her eyes, and felt the spiritual residue coating them like oil. "This money is cursed," she said quietly. "The woman who gave it to you is walking in very dark places. She wanted to buy your soul, my son, but she doesn't know that you've been protected since birth." That night, Celestine performed a powerful ritual. She called on ancestors and protective spirits, creating a shield around Antoine that Mabella's dark magic could never penetrate. Then she did something more, she turned the curse back on its sender. In spiritual warfare, this is called a reflection. Any harm intended for Antoine would return directly to Mabella, but magnified, striking at what she loved most. The next day, when Mabella tried to activate her charm on Antoine, it bounced back like a stone thrown against iron. She felt the recoil in her spirit but didn't understand its meaning. Not yet. That same hour, on the other side of the world in France, Mabella's 3 children, Marc, Sylvie, and Diane, were traveling together in one vehicle, something they rarely did. They were discussing finally visiting their mother in Cameroon, talking about how long it had been since they'd seen her. The cars found them on a highway outside Paris. Witnesses said the car suddenly swerved for no visible reason, as if an invisible force had grabbed the steering wheel. It crashed through a barrier and tumbled down an embankment, exploding on impact. All 3 died instantly. Back in Douala, Mabella was preparing for her Friday night ritual when her phone rang. The voice on the other end spoke words that shattered her world. "Madam, there's been a terrible accident. Your children, all 3. I'm so sorry." The phone fell from her hand. A scream tore from her throat that neighbors would later say sounded more animal than human. She collapsed to the floor, her massive body shaking with sobs that came from somewhere deeper than grief. They came from the sudden realization that her protection was gone. The ego did not come that Friday night. The mansion fell silent in a way it had never been before. The dark covenant that had protected and enriched her for years had broken, shattered by a mother's love and a more powerful magic than she had ever known. The morning after her children's death, Mabella's neighbors knew something terrible had happened. Her usual loud morning greetings were absent. Her compound remained eerily silent. When brave neighbors finally entered, they found her sitting on her living room floor, still wearing the previous night's clothes, staring at nothing with eyes that had seen too much. She had aged overnight. The supernatural youth that had kept her skin smooth despite her years had vanished like morning mist. Deep wrinkles appeared on her face, her eyes sank into shadows, her skin took on a grayish tone. She looked every bit of her true age, plus the weight of all her sins. But something worse was happening inside her mind. The protective enchantment that had kept her sane while serving darkness had broken along with everything else. Her conscience, silenced for so many years, suddenly screamed at full volume. The faces of every young man she had sacrificed appeared before her eyes, Etien, Jean-Paul, and all the others whose names she had tried to forget. By afternoon, people from all over Bonaberi gathered outside her gate, drawn by rumors that something dramatic was unfolding. Mabella emerged from her house, but she was not the confident woman they knew. She stumbled like a drunk person, her expensive clothes hanging awkwardly on her suddenly aged body. "I killed them," she screamed to the gathering crowd. "I killed them all. The boys who disappeared, Etien, Jean-Paul, Thomas, Samuel, all of them. I gave them to the ego." The crowd fell silent, shock rippling through them like a physical wave. Some people pulled out their phones, recording everything. Others backed away, suddenly afraid of the monster they had been living beside all these years. "There's an ego," Mabella continued, her voice breaking. "A spirit ego that comes every Friday night. I fed it young men, innocent boys with bright futures, and it gave me money, beauty, everything. But now it's gone. Now my children are dead." The curse came back. It came back. She fell to her knees in the dust, a sight no one had ever imagined seeing. Mabella, the proud queen of Bonaberi, groveling in dirt while confessing to serial murder through spiritual means. Antoine's mother, Celestine, arrived at the scene. She looked at Mabella with eyes that held no triumph, only sadness for a soul that had chosen darkness and was now reaping the consequences. "You were warned," Celestine said quietly, though her voice carried to everyone present. "Every person who walks in darkness receives warnings. But you chose wealth over wisdom, money over morality. Now you must face what you have done." Mabella looked up at her, recognition dawning. You're his mother. You turned it back. You sent my curse back to me." "I protected my son," Celestine responded simply. "Your darkness could not touch him because he walks in light. What happened to your children was not my doing, it was yours. Every spell you cast, every life you took, created spiritual debts that had to be paid. The universe always balances its books." The police arrived within hours. Mabella confessed everything, her words tumbling out in a desperate flood as if by speaking them she could somehow make the weight lighter. She told them about the witch in Comber village, about the red powder, about every young man who had entered her house and never left. Officers searched her mansion and found things that made even experienced policemen recoil: ritual items, bones, photographs of her victims, journals where she had recorded each sacrifice with businesslike precision. The evidence was overwhelming, though proving spiritual murder in a court of law would be almost impossible, but Mabella was beyond caring about legal consequences. Her real punishment had already begun, and it would follow her for whatever remained of her life. The trial of Mabella became the most talked about case in Cameroonian history. Courtrooms filled beyond capacity every day, with people traveling from across the country to witness the fall of the woman who had seemed untouchable. News channels covered every moment, and the nation was divided between those who believed in spiritual murder and those who dismissed it as superstition. The prosecutor presented physical evidence, the ritual items, the journals, the photographs, but the real power came from the testimonies. Family members of the disappeared young men came forward, one after another, identifying their loved ones in Mabella's records. The courtroom filled with their tears, their anger, their desperate need for closure. Nadege, Etienne's girlfriend, testified about how the man she loved had changed overnight after meeting Mabella. Jean-Paul's elderly parents spoke about their son's final phone call, how his voice sounded hollow and distant. Others shared similar stories, promises, gifts, sudden personality changes, then disappearance. Celestine was called as an expert witness on traditional spiritual practices. She explained to the court, in terms even skeptics could understand, how certain covenants required blood sacrifice and how Mabella's sudden wealth and youth were signs of such dark agreements. In our tradition, Celestine testified, every blessing has a source, and every curse has a cost. Wealth that appears from nowhere is never free. Mabella paid for her riches with the lives of innocents, and now she pays for those lives with her own suffering. Mabella sat through it all in silence, no longer the loud, proud woman who had dominated every room she entered. She had confessed to everything already, driven mad by guilt and the breaking of her spiritual protection. Her lawyers argued diminished capacity, claiming she had been under spiritual compulsion, but even they seemed half-hearted in their defense. The judge, a wise older man who balanced modern law with respect for traditional beliefs, delivered his verdict with gravity that silenced the entire courtroom. This court recognizes that we cannot legally prove death by spiritual means, he began. However, we can prove fraud, kidnapping through deception, and conspiracy. More importantly, the defendant has confessed repeatedly to causing the deaths of at least 12 young men. Whether by physical or spiritual means, these deaths occurred, and families have lost their sons. He sentenced her to life imprisonment, but added something that sent chills through everyone present. Your real sentence, however, has already begun. You will live with what you have done, and neither wealth nor beauty will protect you anymore. The darkness you served has abandoned you, and now you face your remaining years in the light of truth, which for you will be the harshest punishment of all. Mabella was led away to Kondengui Central Prison, Cameroon's most notorious facility. The woman who had lived in luxury would now spend her days in a cramped cell, surrounded by others who had also chosen evil paths. Her mansion was seized by the government. Her gold shop was closed. Her cars were sold at auction. Everything she had built through blood and darkness disappeared like smoke, leaving nothing behind but pain and lessons. The families of her victims held memorial services for their lost sons. Nadege planted a tree in Etien's memory, knowing he would never come home. Jean-Paul's parents created a scholarship fund, hoping that something good could come from their tragedy. Each family found their own way to heal, though the scars would remain forever. Antoine, the young man who had been protected, became an advocate for spiritual awareness. He traveled around Cameroon teaching young people to recognize spiritual dangers, to value their lives over material temptation, to understand that every gift has a price and not all prices should be paid. Mabella taught us all a lesson, he told audiences. She showed us that darkness always demands more than it gives, that blood money eventually demands blood payment, and that no amount of wealth is worth your soul. News of Mabella's fall spread across Cameroon like wildfire, sparking conversations in every village, city, and household. Churches used her story as a cautionary tale during sermons. Traditional healers spoke about the dangers of dark covenants. Parents warned their children about accepting gifts from strangers, especially those that seemed too generous. In Bonabri, Mabella's former mansion stood empty for months before the government converted it into a youth center. The building that had been a place of darkness became a space for education, job training, and spiritual counseling. It was a symbolic transformation, turning evil's headquarters into a place of hope. The witch in Komba village who had initiated Mabella into darkness suddenly found herself unwelcome. Villagers who had once feared her now confronted her, demanding she leave. We will not harbor those who destroy lives, the village chief declared. Your darkness must find another home. She disappeared one night, and people said they heard the sound of massive wings, the same ego that had served Mabella, perhaps taking away the witch who had created so many monsters. No one knew where she went, and no one wanted to find out. Celestine, Antoine's mother, was approached by many families seeking protection for their children. She taught them traditional methods of spiritual shielding, but she also gave them practical wisdom. Protection begins with values, she told them. Teach your children to recognize greed in their own hearts. Teach them that character is more valuable than possessions. Teach them that if something seems too good to be true, it usually is. The darkness preys on desperation and desire. A protected spirit is not just one shielded by rituals, but one grounded in truth. Universities across Cameroon began incorporating Mabella's case into psychology and sociology classes, examining how charisma and wealth could be used to manipulate vulnerable people. Students studied the pattern of her victims, all young men with bright futures, all desperate enough to accept help from a stranger, all blinded by material promises. Documentaries were made. Books were written. Her story became part of Cameroon's collective consciousness, a reminder that evil often wears expensive clothes and speaks with a kind voice. In Kondengui prison, Mabella's life was unrecognizable from what it had been. She shared a cell with 3 other women, sleeping on a thin mat on concrete floors. The food was basic, the conditions harsh, and every luxury she had once enjoyed now felt like a distant dream, or perhaps a nightmare. But the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the torment in her mind. Without the ego's dark magic sustaining her, she aged rapidly. Her body, which had been supernaturally preserved, now showed every one of her 60-plus years. Her hair turned completely white. Her skin became paper-thin. She looked like what she truly was, an old woman who had sold her soul and lost everything. The other prisoners avoided her, sensing something unclean about her presence. Even in a place filled with criminals, Mabella stood apart as someone who had crossed lines that even hardened criminals wouldn't dare approach. At night, she claimed she still had the ego. Its screech echoed in her nightmares, but now it sounded angry, betrayed. The covenant she had broken by failing to provide fresh sacrifices demanded its own payment. She would wake up screaming, terrifying her cellmates, crying out names of the young men she had killed. Etien. Jean-Paul. Forgive me. I didn't know what I was doing. I was desperate. I was hungry. But desperation and hunger did not excuse murder. Her cellmates learned to ignore her screams, just as she had once ignored the screams of her victims' families. 6 months into her sentence, Mabella received an unexpected visitor. It was Nadege, Etienne's former girlfriend. She had aged too, but from grief rather than curses. Her eyes carried the weight of love lost and dreams destroyed. They sat across from each other in the prison's visiting room, separated by a metal table scarred with years of tears and confessions. Why did you come? Mabella asked, her voice barely a whisper. Because I need to understand, Nadege replied, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. Etien loved me. We were going to get married. He had plans, dreams, a future. Why did you take him? What did his death give you that was worth destroying everything he could have been? Mabella looked at her hands, once adorned with golden rings, now bare and wrinkled. Nothing, she finally answered. It gave me nothing that lasted. I got money that's now gone. I got beauty that faded. I got power that abandoned me. But I lost my children. I lost my soul. I lost everything that mattered. Then why? Nadege's voice cracked. Why did you do it? Because I was foolish, Mabella said, tears finally streaming down her weathered face. I thought wealth was happiness. I thought poverty was the worst thing that could happen to a person. But I was wrong. The worst thing is becoming a monster and not realizing it until it's too late. Nadege stood to leave, but paused at the door. I came here hating you, she said quietly. I wanted to see you suffer. But now I just feel empty. You took Etien from me, but you also took yourself from your own children. We are both victims of your choices. After she left, Mabella sat alone in the visiting room until the guards came to take her back to her cell. That conversation marked the beginning of something unexpected, not redemption, for some sins are too great to redeem, but perhaps awareness. She began writing letters to the families of her victims. Most were never opened, thrown away by recipients who wanted no contact with their loved one's killer. But a few were read, and those few brought a small measure of closure to families who had spent years wondering what happened. In those letters, Mabella told the truth. She described how she had manipulated their sons, how the charm had worked, how the ego had taken them. She didn't ask for forgiveness, she knew she deserved none, but she offered the only thing she could, the truth. Word of her letters spread beyond the prison walls. Some people said she was just seeking attention or trying to reduce her sentence. But others, particularly those who understood spiritual matters, recognized something different. They saw a soul finally awakening to the magnitude of its own darkness, too late to change anything but perhaps not too late to warn others. Celestine, when asked about Mama Bella's transformation, said simply, "Consequences are the universe's way of teaching lessons. Some people learn from warnings. Others only learn from pain. Mama Bella is learning from pain, and her lesson will last whatever remains of her lifetime." 3 years passed since Mama Bella's imprisonment, and Cameroon continued to reckon with the lessons her story taught. The name Mama Bella became synonymous with a warning: beware of wealth without source, beauty without age, and generosity without reason. In schools across the nation, teachers used her story to open conversations about greed, manipulation, and the dangers of sacrificing values for material gain. Students learned to question suspicious offers, to value integrity over possessions, and to understand that every choice carries spiritual and practical consequences. The families of Mama Bella's victims formed a support organization called Light After Darkness. They met monthly to share their grief, support each other's healing, and work to prevent other families from experiencing similar tragedies. They partnered with traditional healers, churches, and mosques to educate young people about spiritual dangers. Nadej became one of the organization's most active members. She channeled her grief into purpose, speaking at schools and community centers about Etien's story. "He was brilliant and kind," she would tell audiences, often with tears still fresh in her eyes. "He had so much to offer this world. But he met someone who saw him not as a person, but as a transaction." Don't let desperation or desire make you blind to danger. Antoine, the young man who had been protected, completed his electrical training and became a successful businessman. But he never forgot how close he had come to becoming another of Mama Bella's victims. He hired young people from difficult backgrounds, offering them real opportunities with no strings attached, showing them what genuine help looked like. "Mama Bella taught me that the way you gain matters more than what you gain," he often said. Success built on someone else's destruction is not success, it's a curse waiting to return home. In Kondengui prison, Mama Bella's health declined rapidly. The supernatural preservation that had kept her young for so many years had been reversed, and her body aged with accelerated speed. Prison doctors said her condition defied medical explanation. She was literally being consumed from within, as if something was taking back all the years she had borrowed. She spent her days in the prison chapel, the only place where she found any peace. The prison chaplain, Father Michel, visited her regularly. He didn't offer easy forgiveness or cheap grace, but he sat with her in her suffering, bearing witness to her genuine repentance. "Can God forgive what I've done?" she asked him one day, her voice barely audible. "God's mercy is infinite," Father Michel replied carefully. "But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. You can be forgiven and still face the results of your actions. You can find peace with God and still carry the weight of what you've done. Redemption isn't about escaping punishment, it's about facing it with transformed understanding." One evening, as the sun set over the prison walls painting the sky in shades of red and orange, Mama Bella felt a familiar presence. The temperature in her cell dropped suddenly. Her cellmates, without understanding why, felt compelled to leave, finding excuses to be anywhere else. She looked up and saw it, the ego. But it no longer appeared as the magnificent, powerful spirit it once had been. Now it looked weakened, angry, diminished. The breaking of their covenant had affected it too. "You failed me," it spoke directly into her mind, its voice like grinding metal. "You were supposed to feed me forever. You were supposed to honor our agreement." "I know," Mama Bella whispered, surprising herself with her calmness. "But I was also a mother, and I failed my children. I was also a human being, and I failed my own humanity. Breaking my word to you was inevitable because I was breaking everything else." The ego screeched, a sound of fury and frustration. "You will die soon. The years I gave you are being reclaimed with interest. You will suffer." "I am already suffering," she replied. "And I deserve it. But I will die with truth on my lips and names in my prayers. I will die warning others. I will die different from how I lived." The ego stared at her with its burning eyes, perhaps confused by finding genuine remorse where it expected only fear. Then, without ceremony, it vanished. Mabella knew it was the last time she would ever see it. 2 months later, on a quiet morning when rain fell softly over Yaoundé, Mabella died in the prison infirmary. She was 68 years old but looked 90. Her last words, witnessed by Father Michel, were the names of her victims: Etien, Jean-Paul, Thomas, Samuel. On and on, naming each young man whose life she had taken, asking their forgiveness even though she knew most would never grant it. News of her death spread quickly. Some people celebrated, feeling justice had finally been completed. Others felt only sadness at a life so thoroughly wasted. The families of her victims experienced mixed emotions, relief that her story was finished, but also the reopening of wounds that had never fully healed. Her body was buried in an unmarked grave in the prison cemetery, a stark contrast to the golden monument she once imagined for herself. No family attended, her children were dead because of her own curse, and no one else claimed her. Only Father Michel stood at the graveside, offering prayers for a soul that had chosen darkness but found a sliver of light before the end. In the months following her death, something remarkable happened. Young people across Cameroon began sharing her story voluntarily, not as entertainment but as genuine warning. It became part of the national consciousness, a cautionary tale that transcended tribal and regional differences. Mabella's story is Cameroon's story, one social commentator noted. It's about what happens when we value material success over human dignity, when we are willing to sacrifice others for our own advancement, when we forget that wealth without conscience is poverty of the worst kind. The youth center that had been created from her mansion became one of the most successful in Douala. Thousands of young people passed through its doors, learning skills, receiving counseling, and understanding their worth beyond material measures. A plaque at the entrance read, "From darkness, we choose light. From greed, we choose generosity. From death, we choose life." Celestine continued her work as a traditional healer, but she also became an advocate for integrating traditional spiritual wisdom with modern education. Our ancestors understood that the spiritual and physical worlds are connected, she taught. Mabella's mistake was thinking she could manipulate spiritual laws without consequences. We must teach our children to respect both realms. On the 5th anniversary of Mabella's arrest, Light After Darkness held a memorial event in Bonabri. Families of her victims attended, along with hundreds of community members. They lit candles, shared stories, and recommitted themselves to preventing similar tragedies. Nadege, now a counselor specializing in helping young people resist manipulation, addressed the crowd. Etien died because someone saw his potential as something to harvest rather than nurture. But his death, and the deaths of all the other victims, will not be meaningless if we learn the lessons their stories teach. We must build a Cameroon where success is measured not by what we accumulate, but by how we lift each other up. The crowd erupted in applause, and as the sun set over Douala, painting the sky in brilliant colors, there was a sense that something had shifted. Evil had been exposed. Darkness had been confronted. And while the pain of loss would never fully heal, the community had chosen to transform tragedy into wisdom. Mabella's legacy was not the wealth she accumulated or the power she wielded. Her legacy was the thousands of young people who heard her story and chose differently. It was the families who found strength in shared grief. It was the society that looked at itself honestly and asked hard questions about values, success, and the price of ambition. In the end, her greatest impact came not from her years of evil, but from her exposure and fall. She became a teacher through her terrible choices, showing an entire nation what happens when we lose our way, when we sacrifice others for ourselves, when we forget that true wealth is measured in lives enhanced, not destroyed. And somewhere, in the memories of those who loved them, Etien, Jean-Paul, and all the other young men lived on, not as victims of darkness, but as reminders of light, of potential, of the preciousness of every human life and the responsibility we all carry to protect, nurture, and honor each other. The story of Mabella teaches us profound truths that transcend culture and time. 1. The source of wealth matters. Success gained through the suffering of others is not success, it's a debt that will eventually be repaid with devastating interest. True prosperity comes from honest work, integrity, and contributions that lift others up rather than tear them down. 2. Desperation is not justification. Mabella's poverty was real, and her desperation was understandable. But desperation does not justify destroying others. There are always choices, even in difficult circumstances, and the choices we make in our darkest moments reveal our true character. 3. Spiritual laws are real, whether we call it karma, divine justice, or natural consequences, the universe maintains balance. Every action creates ripples, and what we send out eventually returns to us. Mabella's story reminds us that we cannot escape the consequences of our choices, no matter how powerful we believe ourselves to be. 4. Protection begins with values. Antoine was saved not just by his mother's spiritual protection, but by the values she had instilled in him: caution, discernment, and respect for warnings. The best protection against manipulation is a strong moral foundation and the wisdom to recognize when something is too good to be true. 5. It's never too late for truth. Even though Mabella's repentance came far too late to undo her crimes, her willingness to tell the truth in her final years provided closure for some families and served as a warning to others. Truth-telling, even when painful, has value. 6. Community healing is possible. The families of Mabella's victims chose to transform their grief into purpose, creating light after darkness to prevent similar tragedies. This shows us that even the deepest wounds can become sources of wisdom and strength when we face them together. 7. Real success enriches others. Antoine's story shows us what genuine success looks like: using your blessings to create opportunities for others, building businesses that serve rather than exploit, and measuring wealth by positive impact rather than personal accumulation. The path forward. Mabella's story is a mirror held up to society, reflecting questions we must all answer. What are we willing to sacrifice for success? How do we define wealth, in currency or in character? Are we building legacies that will stand the test of time, or are we constructing houses of cards that will collapse when the wind changes? Do we see others as fellow human beings with inherent worth, or as resources to be used for our advancement? The choice between light and darkness is not always dramatic. Often it comes in small decisions: accepting questionable money, compromising values for advancement, remaining silent when we should speak up, or pursuing shortcuts that harm others. Every day, we write our own stories. We choose whether to be like Mabella, seeking wealth at any cost, or like Celestine and Antoine, building success with integrity. We decide whether to be predators who feed on the vulnerable or protectors who defend them. The legacy we leave is not determined by how much we accumulate, but by how many lives we enhance. True wealth is measured not in bank accounts but in grateful hearts, not in possessions but in positive impact, not in what we take from the world but in what we give to it. If this story moved you, touched you, or taught you something valuable, subscribe to this channel to receive more powerful African stories with deep moral lessons. Thumbs up like this video to help others discover these important teachings. Speech balloon comment below and tell us, what lesson from Mabella's story spoke to you most? Have you encountered situations where you had to choose between easy wealth and integrity? Loudspeaker, share this story with friends and family, especially young people who need to understand these dangers. Glowing star, turn on notifications so you never miss our next powerful story. Coming next, the tale of the Midnight Marketplace, a chilling story about a woman who discovered a secret market that only appeared at 3 a.m., where anything could be bought, for the right price. But some bargains are far more expensive than they appear. Remember, your story is being written right now, with every choice you make. Choose wisely. Choose integrity. Choose life. See you in the next video.